Today's lesson is Ancient Stones of Mystery. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And my name is Helen.
And today we're going to talk about some ancient stones that are a kind of a mystery, okay? Think about it. Think about this question. In various places around the world, there are stones or stone structures, like, say, Machu Picchu in South America, for example. And, of course, we don't really know a lot about those structures or those stones because they didn't really leave behind any information. So what is another gathering of stones that are kind of mysterious, Helen?
Well, I guess you could consider the Great Pyramid of Egypt to be a mystery. A mystery is something that is difficult to explain because no one is sure how it was built, how the people back then were able to lift and transport those huge, heavy blocks of stone and use them to build this really tall structure, which is now called the pyramid. So how do they do it? It's a mystery.
That's right. So, of course, today we're talking about some ancient stones in England, specifically Stonehenge. You may have heard about this place. Lots of people like to go there, but they're still shrouded in mystery. They really don't know why they were built and who built them and exactly how they transported all those rocks from far away with the technology of the time. Maybe they were helped by aliens with UFOs or something like that, but that's for you guys to discuss later on. So let's find out what this is all about. Let's talk about those ancient stones of mystery. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson.
Ancient Stones of Mystery. Ravaged by the passage of time, the pillars of Stonehenge have stood watch over the Salisbury Plain in southern England for thousands of years. Today they attract nearly 1 million visitors annually, and for good reason, as the site is considered one of the most mysterious ancient monuments still in existence.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 ravage， 这个字是动词，指摧残或是毁坏。例如 A series of natural disasters ravaged the country. 一连串的天灾摧毁了这个国家。另外这个字也可以当名词。举例来说 The 80-year-old Grand Theatre suffered the ravages of an owner who doesn't care. 这个80年的剧院遭受了老板不在乎的摧残。再来我们看到片语 stand watch 或是 stand guard 表示守卫、站岗或是看守。例如 The police stood watch in front of the MRT station. 警察在捷运站前站岗。或是 The dog stood guard over the property at night. 那只狗夜晚守卫家园。接着我们看到单字 mysterious， 这个字是形容词，指神秘的或是难以理解的，像是 A mysterious stranger lives in that old house， 一名神秘的陌生人住在那栋老房子里，或是 The man died of a mysterious illness， 那名男子死于一种神秘的怪病。另外介绍这个字的名词 mystery， M-Y-S-T-E-R-Y mystery 指谜团、神秘的事物或是神秘。举例来说 The police were never able to solve the mystery about the diamond. 警方从来无法解决关于这个钻石的谜题。或是 The plot in the movie is a murder mystery. 电影的剧情是关于一个谋杀谜团。
We're talking about Stonehenge, and the writer describes it as ravaged by the passage of time. The pillars of Stonehenge have stood watch over the Salisbury Plain in southern England for thousands of years. So the first word here, ravaged, it's a verb and it means to destroy or to badly damage. And when something is ravaged by the passage of time, it means that this thing is very old and it has been damaged by time, by things that happen through time, such as bad weather, maybe storms and the beating sun and other things related to nature.
Exactly. So again, we're talking about Stonehenge, and they've stood watch over the Salisbury Plain in southern England. That, of course, is referring to the location of Stonehenge, and they've stood watch there. They've just been standing there. It seems like there are sentinels there or guards there, and of course, they've been there for thousands of years. And today, they attract nearly 1 million visitors annually, and for good reason, as the site is considered one of the most mysterious ancient monuments still in existence. So yes, lots of people go there. Nearly 1 million people make the trip there, and for a good reason. They're not just going there because they don't have any other place to go. They're actually going there for a specific reason, because it is a great place to go to. The reason is it's considered one of the most mysterious monuments still in existence. So if something's mysterious, we really don't know much about it, okay? It's there, it exists, maybe somebody's doing something, but you don't know what it is or why it's there. Like, for example, the other night I heard some mysterious noises coming from the room next door. Nobody was in there, nobody sleeps in that room, but there were some mysterious sounds coming from that room. Maybe it's haunted.
Yep, and this monument is not only mysterious, but it's also ancient, and it's still in existence, which means it's still there. It hasn't been destroyed by time, by the passage of time. And a monument here is a structure that is built in a public place, and it's usually built to celebrate an important person or an important event. So we're not really sure why Stonehenge was built, but in the case of more modern monuments, we know exactly why the monument was built, why it was erected. For instance, in the United States, a very famous monument is the Lincoln Memorial, which includes a statue of Abraham Lincoln, and it's very important to the United States because it commemorates a very important president and a particular time in American history.
Okay, let's go on now to the second part and continue to talk about Stonehenge.
According to experts, the Stonehenge we see today wasn't created in one go. Instead, it's the result of roughly 1,500 years of effort. The earliest part, dating back to 3000 BC, was likely all henge and no stone. It consisted primarily of a circular ditch with banks built up on each side.
第二部分我们看到 circular 这个字的词性为形容词，表示环状的或是圆形的。举例来说 There is a circular park in the middle of the city. 在城市的中央有一座圆形的公园。或是 There is a circular path around the park that is great for jogging. 围绕着公园的环状小路很适合慢跑。
So let's take a closer look at Stonehenge. According to experts, the Stonehenge we see today wasn't created in one go. So according to experts, the Stonehenge, what we see today as the group of slabs of stone that we see today, they were not put there in one go, which means they weren't put there all at one time. They may have happened over a period of time. Maybe one piece was placed there and then another piece was placed there. But in any case, it wasn't done all at once.
Exactly. We can't say that about modern buildings. For example, we can say that Taipei 101 was built in one go. They started construction and they kept on working until it was finished. It wasn't an ongoing project where they built maybe the first 10 floors and then they stopped working, and then 20 years later they resumed and built a couple more stories. No, it was built in one go. But in this particular case, Stonehenge wasn't created in one go. It was built in fits and starts, I guess you could say. Instead, it's the result of roughly 1,500 years of effort. You could also say 1,500 years. A lot of people will just say 1,500 years. That's a long time to build something. Imagine that if you're building something that someone started 1,000 years before. How would you know exactly what they were trying to accomplish?
That is indeed a mystery, and why would they continue something that happened 1,500 years ago? They must have known what the original purpose was, but today we don't really know. Well, the earliest part, dating back to 3000 BC, was likely all henge and no stone. It consisted primarily of a circular ditch with banks built up on each side. So if you can picture what Stonehenge was like at about 3000 BC, it was a circular ditch, which means that, first of all, ditch is a long, narrow hole that you dig into the ground. Often this hole is dug there for the purpose of letting water to flow into it. So we have a ditch, which is a long, narrow hole in the ground, and it's in a circular form. Something that is circular is in the shape of a circle. So that is what Stonehenge was like. There was no stone yet around 3000 BC.
Exactly. So they first started with that circular ditch with no stone structures, and then it had banks built up on each side. A bank is the side of something like the bank of a river, the river bank, etc. So it probably had these pieces of land, maybe dirt built up at an angle on the sides, and that's how it existed for a long time until maybe hundreds of years later they decided to make changes to it, and of course it was an ongoing project, and of course it took a long time to build. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now and continue to talk about the construction of Stonehenge.
Over the centuries, an ever more complex arrangement of stones was erected, and this is where the head-scratching begins. While the massive sarsen blocks have been traced to the local area, the smaller bluestones came from at least 150 miles away. On top of that, the avenue leading to the stone circle lines up perfectly with the rising sun during the summer solstice. It's still unclear exactly why the monument marks the sun's movements and how the bluestones could have been transported so far with the technology of the time.
第三部分我们看到单字 erect， 这个字是动词，指建造、建立或是树立，像是 This monument was erected for the beloved politician。 这座纪念碑是为了纪念这位备受爱戴的政治家而树立，或是The townspeople erected a statue to honor the town's founder. 镇民们建立了一座雕像来表示对这座城镇创始者的尊敬。最后我们看到形容词 massive， 指巨大的、大而重的或是大规模的。例如 The government made massive cuts to military spending. 政府在军事支出上做了大幅缩减。另外补充一个同义字 enormous， enormous。Enormous 这个字也是指巨大的，像是 There is an enormous clock tower at the center of the town。 在这城镇的中心有一座巨大的钟楼，或是 An enormous whale washed up on the beach， 一只巨大的鲸鱼被冲上海岸。
So in the very beginning, Stonehenge was basically a circular ditch which had banks built up on each side of this ditch. But over the centuries, an ever more complex arrangement of stones was erected, and this is where the head scratching begins. So over hundreds of years, Stonehenge became ever more complex, or the arrangement of it became more complex, because stones began to be erected around this complex. To erect something means to put it together to build up, or to use parts of something and to put them together so that it stands upright. And this is what gradually happened over centuries, and this is also where the head scratching begins. So when you scratch your head, usually, well, apart from having an itchy scalp, it might mean that you are confused about something or you are wondering about something. So often when you're thinking about a problem, you scratch your head as you are thinking. And this is used this way. Head scratching just means this is where the confusion, this is where the mystery, this is where all the questions begin.
Exactly. So they probably figured out exactly what that ditch was for. They probably, dug into the ground and found things and did carbon dating and stuff like that and figured that that out, but then when they started bringing the stones in, then they weren't so sure what was happening. That's when we have some head scratching, huh? What was that all about? Why did they do that? And where did they get those rocks? And how the heck did they move them? While the massive sarsen blocks have been traced to the local area, the smaller blue stones came from at least 150 miles away. So they've been able to figure out that these massive blocks of sarsen, that's a kind of sandstone, by the way, they could figure out that those were from the local area on the Salisbury Plain there. They were massive, of course. They were huge. So they thought, okay, that makes sense. They could have found those rocks locally and moved them to the site there, maybe 1 inch at a time or something like that. But then they had a big question about these smaller blue stones. They came from at least 150 miles away. That would be the nearest source of those stones. And that's where it gets kind of mysterious. How the heck did they transport those heavy rocks all that way with the technology of the day?
Yep, and on top of that, the avenue leading to the stone circle lines up perfectly with the rising sun during the summer solstice. So the phrase on top of that just means besides that, furthermore, in addition. So on top of the fact that blue stones that were used to build Stonehenge came from at least 150 miles away, besides that fact, the avenue, which is basically a wide street or a wide road, the avenue leading to the stone circle lines up perfectly with the rising sun during the summer solstice. So they built this avenue in a way that it lines up, that it is completely level with the rising sun during the summer solstice. The summer solstice is the day of the year when the sun is above the horizon for the longest amount of time. And for people who live in the northern hemisphere, that's usually around June 21st. So a lot of science and a lot of precise measuring went into the building of Stonehenge and also the avenue that leads up to it.
Right, so they got the avenue there, and it lines up with the rising sun. To line up means to arrange things in a straight line. If you're in the army, for example, your sergeant or your lieutenant or whatever may ask you to line up for inspection. You'll all have to stand in a line so that the general can take a look at each of you and figure out if you're a good soldier or not. So yes, here the circle lines up perfectly with that avenue, and it matches the rising sun during the summer solstice, and that will be the longest day of the year.
Right. So these are some of the mysteries surrounding Stonehenge. It's still unclear exactly why the monument marks the sun's movements and how the blue stones could have been transported so far with the technology of the time. So back then, there was no electrical equipment or vehicles that could have transported these very heavy pieces of stone from so far away. And that is why it's a mystery today how Stonehenge was built.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's listen now to Hanny, our beloved Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分提到巨石阵每年吸引将近100万名游客。他写说 The site is considered one of the most mysterious ancient monuments still in existence. 该地被认为是现存最神秘的古代遗迹之一。好，文中它用到 in existence 来表达存在、现存的，那它可以摆在要修饰的名词后面，像 the largest animal in existence 就可以表达现存最大的动物了。好，那另外我们是要介绍动词 consider 表达认为的用法。要表达认为某人或某事物怎么样怎么样，主动的句型我们可以用 consider 某人或某事物 to be 再加名词或形容词，而被动的句型是某人或某事物 be considered to be 加上名词或形容词。这两个句型当中的 to be 是可以省略不用的。那我们来造两个例句。He has always considered himself lucky. 他一直都认为自己很幸运。 Bob Dylan is considered to be one of the most influential artists in pop music. Bob Dylan 被视为对流行音乐最具影响力的艺人之一。好，那我们再来看到课文第3部分第一句，他提到几个世纪以来立起了越来越复杂的石头排列，文中是用到 erect这个字来表达立起建立。我们来学习它的字首字根。好，看到 rect 这个字根呢，它带有正确的、恰当或是使什么变直，也有引导的意思。那么像 correct 正确的，还有 direct 这个直接的，这2个字里面都有这个字根嘛。好，那么在 erect 这个字当中，它的字首 e 是来自 ex， 在这边是有向上的意思，而字根 rect 表示使什么变直。当我们在搭帐篷的时候，是不是会让它向上立起来？还有当我们立一道墙啊，设立一座雕像的时候，那个物体看起来也会直挺挺的向上立着，这样应该可以联想到 erect 它有竖立建立的意思。它也可以当形容词来描述是直立的。我们顺便补充几个相同字根的单字哦。第一个是 rectangle， 好 rectangle， 其中的 rect 表示直的，那么 angle 就是角度，直的角度那就是直角咯。我们用4个直角所构成的形状是长方形，这样去想说 rectangle 它就有矩形长方形的意思。第二个补充的是 rectify， 好 rectify， rectify 其中的 rect 表示正确， ify 是动词字尾，把2部分组合在一起 rectify 它就有矫正改正的意思咯。那么第3个是同学们比较熟悉的单词是 direct， 它的字首 di 是来自 dis 表示分开，那么字根 rect 表示引导，那么 direct 当动词它就有指导指引的意思了。好，以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Mysterious. We heard a mysterious noise coming from the forest. Monument. That country is home to a number of ancient monuments. Circular. There is a circular path that leads all the way around the lake. Erect. They decided to erect a statue in honor of the general. Massive. A massive tree stood in the center of the garden.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.